Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Three Principles Global Community webinar. The Three Principles Global Community, or 3PGC, is a nonprofit organization that's committed to bringing an understanding of the three principles to people throughout the world. Today, we have Lynn McCright and Teresa Walding with us. They are both with the Advancing Holistic Health Coaching Program for nurses and licensed health professionals. And Lynn and Teresa, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, and you can share about your program. And I love the topic, resilience for the health in the health profession.
Oh, thank you so much, Bonnie. Yeah, that really was inspired through Dr. Keith Levin's work, and we've been using that title for about 6 months now, and it seems perfect everywhere we use it. I want to say, first of all, to the Three Principles Global Community.org, thank you so much for allowing us to have a nursing and licensed health professional community of interest. It's been such a privilege to lead that group now for 4 years. We're celebrating our 4th anniversary, and I want to just express gratitude for where that's come from. Karen Miller and I started it, and where it's going. We've got about 140 people on it now who are nurses and licensed health professionals. Well, today we would love to talk about, I know that our little bios are going to be listed, so I don't think we really need to explain about that. But what we thought we would just talk about is knowing that Teresa and I are both nurses, and that we established Advancing Holistic Health as a vehicle to bring the principles to the professions, the health professions, nursing and all of the licensed health professions. So we'll talk a little bit about how we learned about the three principles. We'll talk about how that learning has impacted our life, our relationships, and our careers. And then we'll talk about what we see as the way to move forward in bringing this to the profession of nursing and all of the health professions. We'll talk a little bit about what nurse coaching is. It's now certified nationally, actually globally, board certified approach that's just new in the last 6 years. And then lastly, we'll talk about why that's important to healthcare today. So I want to give a huge gratitude to Dr. Keith Blevins for introducing me to Sydney Banks in 1980. And the way that started was I actually met with Dr. Blevins at his home in Texas, and we had a small study group that gathered at his home on Saturday afternoons. And from there, he invited me to go down to Miami to meet Sid. And that moment of meeting Sid, with that huge auditorium filled with 400 people, all health professionals primarily, was a real turning point for me, because I had come from a background that was a family that was very religious and spiritual. So when I heard Sid speak for the first time, I knew that every word was true. And it was just such a joy to me to see it in such a beautiful professional context. And I just saw that this way would unfold through the professions. And it was just a few months later that we actually had the very first Three Principles Global annual conference. And I was very surprised because there were fewer than 20 people. So suddenly we went from a huge auditorium of 400 people to a room full of less than 20. So I understood at that point that not everyone had heard what I had heard when I heard Sid speak for the first time. And it was so fun because I was standing right behind Joe Bailey when he introduced himself to Sid. And Sid said to Joe, "We've been waiting for you." So I think that was a beautiful, insightful moment on Sid's part. And of course, Joe has risen to the occasion. I think I'll pass it over to Teresa. How did you learn about the three principles?
Thanks, Lynn. I actually heard about it from Lynn first. We were in the car one day and she was describing what the principles were and how impactful it was. And I said, well, how do I learn about the principles? And she looked at me and she said, I can't teach it to you. And I went, why not? And so she left it at that. She said, it has to come as an insight. And that was the end of the conversation. But my little brain went, why can't I learn it? Isn't there something about that that I can learn? I don't get it. So I left it alone, and fast forward to probably a couple of years, and I was at the conference in Waco where Dr. Blevins did our 5th annual Central Texas Holistic Nurses Conference in October of 2015. And Friday night, he kind of laid the groundwork a little bit. He talked about flat earth thinking and how that it takes a really long time sometimes for people to change the way they look at things that is impactful for them, that actually changes the way all humans look at things. And so we went to bed. I got up that morning and I was really excited for the conference because I had heard something, but I wasn't sure what. And he started talking more about how thought works. He began to talk about implications, not applications. Implications meaning the implied meaning of something. And all of a sudden I was like, that's what I've been doing my whole life. And all of a sudden I was beginning to see this glimmer of me creating my own life through my own thought. And I started to remember everything I had been through the last 2 or 3 years, to include a daughter coming home from another state, going into rehab and doing some of those worry things for your children as you do, and working, and my husband, being a former soldier, dealing with some of that. And I heard in there that I was only experiencing all of this through my own thought. And it was such a profound understanding and insight that the chronic pain that I had been having for about 5 years disappeared. It was like this little tingle went down my spine and out my hands and feet. And all of a sudden, I felt like I was floating. It was like the weight of the world was lifted off of me. It was so impactful. I don't even know if I heard the rest of the conference, but I knew what I needed to do to help my profession, to help my family, but more so to help myself have a better life. And Lynn and I both signed up for nurse coaching because I think we almost simultaneously realized all of nursing needs to hear this. This is something that when you see it, you can't unsee it, and it helps every single person who sees it. And you can't unsee it. That's the beauty of it. Even when you lose sight of it now and then, and you still have it. And that knowledge is priceless. Lynn?
That's a beautiful example of the definition of thought. So I'll just read that definition that Sid gave us from the missing link, page 48. Thought is the missing link that gives us the power to recognize the illusory separation between the spiritual world and the world of form. So Teresa's example of healing in a moment came through that missing link of thought. And her physical form recognized the truth of what she had heard. I'll talk just a minute also about resilience, since our topic is resilience, the new paradigm of health. The definition that we use of resilience has come to us through Dr. Keith Blevins and Enfeld and Monroe. So the simple definition is resilience is not being bound by circumstances or the past. And to elaborate on that, we say that with the experience of Sydney Banks, we now know experience is rather completely accounted for by our use of the three principles and free will. This paradigm changes everything. Blevins and Monroe. So that's the area that is so impactful when we're working with our health professionals and when our health professionals are working with clients. There's, I wanted to say, there's nobody that it doesn't touch. In other words, everyone is touched by the area of resilience because it absolutely applies to all of us. It doesn't matter what the diagnosis is, it doesn't matter the age, it doesn't matter what type of health professional, but resilience will be seen to be the single most important aspect of health. And so that's how it happens that we have students all the way from the neonatal intensive care unit up to end of life. And all of us can benefit from resilience. So the way that it's impacted my life, relationships, and career are that I actually started a private practice of nursing as long ago as 1986, so 33 years ago. And it was nearly unheard of to have a private practice of nursing at that time. But I lived in California, and that we were very leading edge, and I simply once I had seen that this was the answer, I didn't want to spend any time doing anything else. So since my background is in public health, I simply embraced the entire community, and I taught a course at the community college. I saw clients privately. I worked with a nursing home that was admitting AIDS patients for the first time. That's 33 years ago. Talked to a large industrial firm that was having on-site job accidents. Did a weekend workshop at the Carmel Community Center. Spoke to a mental health, outpatient mental health group, both the clients and the providers in the same room at the same time. And everywhere I went, the community groups, the topic at that time, the terminology that I used, we didn't have resilience. I called it stress resolution and prevention. And it was, I think, very well received. Short-lived because I traveled to Asia and lived overseas just 12 months later. But that experience has really stood me in good stead. And what I saw then, 30 years ago, about bringing this to the profession is what I'm doing now. Teresa? Life, career, relationship?
Right. I think the most profound effect that the principles have had on me has, besides the personal stories that I tell, is at work. I work in a post-anesthesia recovery room still. And I was really truthfully on burnout. I thought there has to be more to life than this. There has to be more to nursing than this. It's very stressful. Sometimes just with the whole orchestration of what has to happen just to get someone to surgery, and then waking them up uneventfully. And I think I hadn't realized how much I had been growing and changing with the principles, just in recognizing thought in the moment. What am I, my thought, my feeling in this moment, and how does that help me? So one day I had a very, very critical patient, and, we were trying to get her off it's called BiPAP. It's a machine that helps you breathe, that gives a little bit of extra pressure to help you breathe better. And I found myself in this place of ease that I had not known before. I had seen it in other nurses in my career, and I wondered how they did it, because when I would get a critical patient, I would have a lot of thinking on my mind, a lot of oh my gosh, I hope I don't make a mistake. What do I do now? Oh, there's so much to do. And I found myself just doing what came next. And at the exact same time I was doing what came next, I was able to interact with my patient. And, you know, when you can't breathe, it's an incredibly stressful time. Anxiety, you're trying to get off the bed. Keeping people calm enough to breathe is also a big deal. So we worked together, the patient and I, as a team. And it was just wonderful. It was about 5 hours of very intensive nursing, doing, you know, different medications and monitoring and that kind of thing. And I noticed that I was moving through it with an ease I hadn't noticed before. And I thought, oh, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about in this present moment, my thought, my feeling, and being able to understand the feeling of that, of knowing what to do next. I look back on that situation, and once I got her to the ICU, she was doing much better, and she gave me a huge hug, and she said, thank you. I was on cloud 9. I was like, you know, after all of that, to actually get to see the other side of the outcome of that was really nice. And I saw that there is an ease that happens when you're just doing the next thing that comes. Being fully focused, fully present, there's no other place to be. And I thought, why can't I be like this all the time? And of course, Dr. Blevins, one of the things that he teaches is sometimes you see it and sometimes you don't. And so I took that to heart, and I thought, okay, it's not gone. I just don't see it right now. And I realized that I was being able to impact my patients by my attention on them that wasn't previously there. And I thought I was a good nurse, but I know now I am a better nurse than I ever was. And I think it's because I understand where this is coming from. I used to blame situations and other people and the stress of the day or being tired. All of that is thought too. And I never knew that.
So in regard to bringing our principles of resilience to nursing, I recall when I was just opening my first private practice that I would simply lay in bed at night after I tucked my daughter in, and I would read Florence Nightingale, her book called Notes on Nursing, What It Is and What It Is Not. And there was just a line in the first part of the introduction that really stood out to me, and it said, knowledge of nursing is knowledge that everyone ought to have of how to put a body into a state of health. And over again, I just would read through those pages, what it is, nursing, what it is and what it is not. Trying to discover for myself what the application is in my own private practice. And so it's a joy that we have discovered just in the last 6 years. We now have a new field, which is called nurse coaching. And it actually is applicable to all areas and all professions, licensed health professions, as health coaching. So we're offering both in our school. And this role is working together with the client to help achieve the client's goals, not our goals, not the goals of the expert, but rather the client's goals, their goals for their health. So it's an intentional conversation that helps the client identify their own answers. And how does that happen? There's only one way, by looking inside. By looking inside, from having an insight into their own internal wisdom, they can find their own answers. And those answers are custom made for them because they come through that person's internal wisdom. So how do we coach? We coach with our internal wisdom, and it's our insights, our sights from within that guide us in working with our clients. So it's as rewarding to us as health professionals as it was to the client that we're working with. I remember in 2016, we had a pre-conference when the Three Principles Conference was held in Los Angeles, and Dr. Blevins and Joe Bailey spoke, transforming the epidemic of burnout, awakening the innate resilience of healers. That is what we are about. Teresa, nurse coaching?
Nurse coaching, yeah. Like Lynn was saying, it really is a new field for nurses. I think nurses have always done this. We've always been champions for our patients, always advocating for our patients, trying to assist them to make better choices, being the expert in telling them what needs to happen, and it never worked. Why doesn't it work? It doesn't work because until the person themselves knows for themselves why they need to do something, it will never happen. And it's not that it's not good information, because it is. And we see people all the time who internalize the information and see their way through maybe a diet plan or exercise that really helps them, and they get better, they do better. Prevention is on the front lines now. And nurse coaching is the perfect vehicle for nursing to approach that with their client. And specifically with the principles, because we know that until someone else can see it for themselves, no change ever happens. Change starts as a thought. We have a feeling. We have an understanding of what that feeling means, and it guides us to the choices that we make. I've seen any number of people that I've coached. One young man, it's not specifically a health coaching session, but he was suffering from depression severely, where he was isolating in his room and basically paralyzed from his own thinking. We've been coaching for about, 8 or 9 months now. And he has come out of his shell completely. He said, I never knew that I was keeping myself in my own prison with my own thoughts. He said, he kept asking me, why isn't this on the news? Everyone needs to know this. Why is it such a secret? And I said, it's not a secret. It's just not everyone's ready to hear it like this, because it's not an intellectualization of the information. You can't get it from the intellect. It has to come as an insight. And part of our job with our students, and we all know what insight is. I know what an insight is. I know exactly what it feels like. But when you're talking about the principles and saying, listen, this is how thought works, they throw up these little barriers, and you're like, no, really, it's how it works. And pretty soon, one day, it was very funny, because when the first time I met him, he was sitting across the room on a couch. He did not want to be there. I was doing a little class for one of my friends and several of her friends. And about halfway through, he came down in and sat down in front of me. And he was all ears. He was like, I'm not sure what you're talking about, but I like it. Keep going. And that was the kind of cue to me that he was hearing something he hadn't heard before. So those are the insights that help people change, that helps them grow, that helps them make choices they didn't even know were available. He said, if I didn't know this, I would have never gone back to school. He's now in school in Houston, earning a degree that he's always wanted to do. He said, I would have never stepped out and done this had I not known about the principles. And then in a roundabout way, that is health to him, because he's now thriving where before he was isolating in his room. And nurses do that all the time. We don't know where our patients have been. We see them, laying in a stretcher or laying in a hospital bed, and we know nothing about them except for what they tell us. The principals have a way of getting past that when we have conversations with people and they begin to see that you're actually listening to them and hearing what they want to say about their health or about what's happening to them. That is a different conversation than going in and talking to someone about the surgery they just had and the wound care. They are more than the wound care. They are more than the surgery. And they may be thinking about, okay, now what? What about my life now? And the implications of, being in the hospital, have work, they can't work at this point. What about their finances at home? What about the family? What about the children that they're taking care of? I've had more conversations with people in the recovery room about how they can take care of their families at home once they get out of the hospital than I ever had about just the surgery itself. And the principals are a guiding light to those conversations. I think it helps us to listen better. And in that way, we don't have to do anything. All we have to do is be present and aware and let them talk. I think the single thing that we don't do as healthcare professionals is just listen to someone talk. Find out what they need, what they want.
It's been really wonderful for us to be bringing this through nursing, because we now have some research that's recently come out from the National Institutes of Health. And that was a study of certified nurse coaches, a survey study. And actually, Teresa and I participated, but it was very interesting findings that 70% of the nurses who were surveyed felt that they had improved job satisfaction. 80% felt that they had improved interpersonal communication, and 85% said that they had improved personal health. So the focus finally is not just on the client, but on the provider herself. So the same things would be true of health coaches also. We have right now 3 top areas that nurse coaches are seeing according to this study. And the first one being the area of stress and anxiety. That just seems to be rampant in our society. So it's no wonder that that's the top area. And just think back 33 years ago, that was the name of my practice, stress prevention and resolution. So not a lot has changed in that time for us culturally. The second area is the huge area that health professionals all see, all the chronic illness, cardiometabolic things, and 60 to 80% of all of our clients are in that category. And then the third category that we're seeing now as well is pain. So those are the top 3 according to the NIH survey. And their summary was that they felt that nurse coaching was ideally suited, especially to advanced practice nurses. But the way that we see it, nurse coaching is suited to all nurses. Now that the average length of stay in the hospital is only 4.5 hours, we truly feel that this is the new leading edge of where the profession is going. About 25% of us work for ourselves in private practice, 25% work in a hospital setting, and the other 50% work all across the board, wherever nurses work. Any to add to that, Teresa?
I was just thinking, as nurse coaches, obviously we work with clients, but what I've seen at my place of work is me learning how to be a nurse coach has impacted the staff. We have conversations over lunch. One of the girls was having a particularly difficult time. She came to work very upset. Her husband was very upset with her for cooking fish at home. And he came in the door and he smelled the fish, and she's very upset about this. And I'm kind of in my own little space going, it's not about the fish. And she's like, what do you mean? And I said, it's about the way he's thinking about it. And you both have a complete separate reality of what's happening as you're trying to cook dinner and he's coming home from work. Now, we live in a world of circumstance, of other people that we think have something to do with about how we feel. And she said, well, I was just wanting to cook something healthy for dinner, and I was really happy, and I was singing while I was cooking, and then he comes in the door and he's like, ew, what's that smell? And I'm like, okay, yeah, it doesn't smell great. And so he proceeds to go on a little thing about that, to the point where she throws the fish in the trash, and they both go to bed mad. And so we were talking about the principles in that context, about each of us having our own thought and feeling about it. And she said, well, yeah, because I was pretty happy until he got home. And, you know, these are the behind the scene things that happen at work for me. So this is just one example of many conversations that I think have helped us nurses to walk out of the room and be back at work. And so we talked about, you know, how thought and feeling are always connected. If we're thinking it, we're feeling it. And that we have no way of knowing how someone else is going to act or react, but we don't have to always take it personally either. And so we had a little more conversation, and we went back to work. And about 2 hours later, I was walking by and she goes, you know what? I thought about what we talked about. You're right. It's not about the fish. And for 6 months, I bet we heard it every day. She goes, and she was applying the insight that she had to her work, to her family, to other coworkers. And so it was kind of a little comedic relief for a minute, that it wasn't about the fish. It's about how you're thinking about it, and how that is what's creating the circumstance that you're living in. And so those are kind of some of the behind the scene things that happen at work when you are learning to be a nurse coach, but also the impact that it has on the staff itself. At that point, I was able to talk with almost everyone that worked there at that time. And I knew that there was something good happening when we had a staff meeting, and people actually were smiling and joking and working together, having different conversations than I'd ever heard, very solution-based, which, you know, in all the books I read, that's what we're supposed to be doing. But this was the first time that I could see it written on their faces that they really intended to do it. And I was like, yes, this is how it works. This is how it impacts us in everything that we do. And it's across the board, which is what I love about the principles. One insight in one area has insight in many areas of our life. And I'm grateful. I am so grateful to have learned this now and be able to bring it through nursing and to whoever I can talk to that will listen.
Yeah, I know one of my colleagues in Europe who heard about this for the first time just wept, tears and tears and tears falling. And then when she finally stopped crying, she realized that she has the rest of her life to use this, and nothing is lost. So she's just doing incredibly beautiful things with her understanding of this. And I just wanted to say that part of our joy in bringing this through the professions is that we can actually see the results, an actual measurable result. So for example, one of my nurse practitioners works in the setting of a diabetic clinic, outpatient clinic, and her clients tend to be 80 something. So one day an 85-year-old lady came in and she was just beside herself with anxiety. She had lost in the previous 3 months 4 family members. And she could not remember to check her blood sugar. She could not remember to give her insulin. And Jan just sat with her real quietly and she said, look, you can't be in two places at once. You can't be here now taking care of yourself and living in the past. And that lady just got fire in her eyes. And she said, do you mean to tell me that I'm not taking care of myself because I'm thinking about them? I can't bring them back, but I have the rest of my life to live. So 3 months later, she comes back and she has more blood sugar checks than she had in the previous 3 years, and an A1C that is ideal for her. So at 85 years old, she just saw it in a flash. And another one of our wonderful nurse coaches was working in the emergency room one evening, and they wheeled in a young man, 25 years old, too morbidly obese to stand on his own and walk. So he said, I'm here to find out what's possible. I want to make some changes, but I want to talk to the doctor. And she said, well, the doctor's over there and can't come right now, but let's talk, you and I. And as the conversation came around, she said, you know, calories are energy, and you are all fueled up and ready to go in any direction you want. And he was so inspired by that. I think they were the most optimistic words that he had ever heard from a healthcare professional. And we already mentioned that the third area that nurse coaches see so often is pain. And I heard a bit about this from our global community. One of our members was in a foot race, and it was a very, very long foot race, and the last 4 miles were uphill, and it was just exhausting. He could hardly breathe, his legs were aching, and what he realized was that his experience in that moment was coming to him through thought. And when that insight came, the pain was still there, but the suffering disappeared. So that's the potential that we have in working with clients today. And it's just such a joy to be bringing this through the health professions. Again, a gratitude to the global principals. I had needed to have some coaching hours in order to sit for my own national board certification, and I simply contacted members of our community. They volunteered, and that's where my clients came from for my own initial certification. And then beyond that, when Advancing Holistic Health opened its doors for the first time 3 years ago, we actually have the privilege of opening on 3 continents. And how did that happen? Because 2 of the people who were the first students into our school had heard about us through the 3 principals global community. One was living in Japan, another one was living in Norway. So we opened in Asia, Europe, and all across the United States at the same time when we opened the doors of our school.
Boy, has it been a journey. I think the impact that it's had on the students that we've had have been so incredible that I never realized how far-reaching the principals were. You know, most of them, I know all of them heard something, but there's a few of them who continue to learn, who want to teach, who are coaching, who understand the principles at that very deep level of thought creating, thought and being connected. And they're helping their patients in ways that I could only have dreamed of 5 years ago. I just am amazed at the way people are bringing it to their everyday life, to their work, to their families. There's a couple of students who are actually bringing it into their hospitals through some resilience training that they're trying to get started at their hospitals. And the thing that one of them has told me, she said, I noticed that the questions we're asking have changed. We're not trying to fit it into models that we've already seen before. You know, healthcare is really good at recycling the same old thing over and over as if it's something brand new. Those of us who have been in healthcare for any length of time have seen, you know, the same idea that's brand new to the next generation that we tried 10 years ago. And we do it again and again and again. But actually asking new questions has been changing the direction that people are moving to meet those criteria of more resilience, less burnout, more job satisfaction, increased patient satisfaction. And I really think that it's coming from a lot of directions. We're just one drop in a big pot of people trying to make things better for people. But what I've also been hearing is that when they've taken our class, our students have taken courses from other nurse coaching programs. And one of our students said, this is the missing link in my program. We touched on it, but this is the whole thing. And I was like, yes, it is. I've been a holistic nurse for almost 20 years, and I have tried every modality you could ever imagine to get myself out of pain, to feel better. I even originally started searching for relief for pain for my husband. That I wasn't having pain at that point, but he was. And that started this journey to where we are now. And I know now there is a thought, feeling connection to pain. It somehow manifests in your body and you feel it. And when that is relieved even a little bit in the recognition of how the principles work, that's the most powerful medicine I've ever seen in my life. And I think nurse coaching has that ability to touch every single person in the world through the nurses that learn about the principles. They teach others and they teach others, and it just keeps going. I think there's 4 million nurses in the United States, and our goal is to teach as many of them as we can. Because the more of us that know about the principles, I think the healthier society will be as a whole. Lynn, you're on mute.
Nursing is the largest health profession worldwide. So we have a big vision for our profession and for all of healthcare. For the last 17 years in a row, there's been a Gallup poll that has been done, and every year the public has said that nurses are considered the most ethical and the most honest of professionals. So we shorten that by saying that nurses are the most trusted. And so we have a wonderful opportunity, an open door really, to bring the principles through nursing to the public. And I'll just say a little bit about what that has looked like as Teresa and I have developed our careers. Well, if we have a message that we want to get out to the world, it can't be just through the spoken word. So now we've had an opportunity to publish, and those are on our website under resources. One article by Teresa and a combined article by both of us, and then 2 others that were written by me. So I know that that's an area that we will be continuing to pursue. And also we've had the opportunity to speak at national conference, and also at a, have a poster at a statewide conference. So it's something that is coming, and we will see it more on a daily basis as our numbers increase. But we've chosen to bring it to the nursing profession because we feel that that's the way that it can move forward through healthcare most rapidly. I think what I want to say about what Teresa was mentioning just now is simply to read the definition again that Sydney Banks, of thought. Thought is the missing link that gives us the power to recognize the illusory separation between the spiritual world and the world of form. And resilience, just thinking back on resilience, my goodness, a brand new definition for us. When we think about resilience, it actually comes from the field of metallurgy. And all of us who have had some experience with life know that a part of what our experience is being bent, spindled, and mutilated. And resilience is being able to bounce back from that. So the new definition of resilience, according to Blevins and Monroe, is that resilience is not being bound by the circumstances or the past. And I think back to the year 2000 when the century changed, and there was one individual who was considered to be the most influential in the 20th century, and that man was a physician. His name is Dr. Sigmund Freud. And Dr. Freud taught us that it's all about the past. So we know that we have a long way to go in regard to correcting misconceptions that have long been held by our profession and by healthcare and by the public. But when we watch our students and our clients express the kinds of freedom that they feel when they realize the past is no longer holding them back, that it's only being brought to them momentarily through their thought in the moment, that is such a huge motivation for them and for us to be able to continue our work. And we're just so grateful for that definition of resilience. So I think I'll just, we've got about 10 minutes left, but I'll just say what we've talked about here, and that may bring up some other insights. We have talked about how Teresa and I individually learned about the three principles, and we actually came together as chapter leaders of our Holistic Nursing Association and have worked in that capacity as volunteers. That has allowed us to be introduced to a large number of nurses, and one of our next endeavors is actually working with executive nurses. So we've started doing business as, which is called executive nurse coaching, and we'll actually be taking this into the hospital setting, working with the uppermost level of nurse executives and their supervisors. We've talked about how it's impacted our personal lives, our relationships, and our careers. We've talked about how we're planning to bring this to nursing and the health professions. And we've talked a bit about the new role of nurse coaching. And of course, one of the things that we have to realize is that healthcare in the United States is connected to the political system, and that health insurance is always a political football, and that the practice of nursing and the practice of all healthcare providers are regulated by the state. So at some point, that interface of politics and healthcare will have to be addressed by nurse coaching as well. We're not there yet, but we only currently have about 500 certified nurse coaches in the world, and about 5,000 holistic nurses in the same association. When we talk about something that creates lasting change, the only way that that can actually occur is through insight. So the goal of all coaching is insight. It's just that more conventional ways of coaching move people, in my estimation, about an inch or an inch and a half. But when they see the principles for themselves through their own inner wisdom, oh my goodness, huge leaps of growth and realization are what we see. And not always all at once. Sometimes just tiny baby steps, but it's always there. And we can depend on this because the principles are constants. They are not variable. They're like gravity. They will never disappear. I'm reminded at this point when 150 years ago, the public did not realize that germs existed. Well, my goodness, Dr. Semmelweis in Vienna realized when a friend of his had a nick on his hand and died from the same symptoms that mothers in the maternity ward were dying from. He realized that what we then called childbed fever was not caused by something that the mother was doing, but rather by something that was on the scalpel. And he called that thing, even though he could not see it, he called it germs. And so he would stand at the door of the delivery room and insist that the surgeons would wash their hands. He insisted that the scalpels be cleaned, and he insisted that they have clean aprons, so that when they came from the morgue, when they had examined the women who had died after childbirth, they would have clean aprons, clean scalpels, and clean hands. Well, the doctors thought it was a lot of bother and that it had never been done that way, and why should they now? But they finally relented and they said, okay, we will allow the nurses to wash the scalpels, and we will allow the maids to clean our aprons. But look at my hands. My hands are not dirty. I won't stop to wash my hands. And it wasn't until 40 years later that the microscope was invented, and finally we could see what was causing that 16% mortality in the maternity ward was actually what was on the scalpel. So in spite of all of that, what we now know is that that changed completely, and completely changed hygiene, completely changed public health, completely changed the way that things are done in the hospitals. And in regard to the three principles, there will be no comparison. The scale which the three principles will impact not only the healthcare professionals, but also the public will be way beyond even the theory of germs. Last thoughts, Teresa?
Just gratefulness for this community, gratefulness for learning about the principles, and I can't wait to see where it goes.
Yeah, we've had a wonderful opportunity to bring this, and I just want to say thank you again to the Three Principles Global Community, and to each of you who are joining us today, and each of you who are watching later. We will be glad to answer questions if you write them in under the video. And Bonnie, thank you so much for being here. And Dr. Blevins, my goodness, thank you for being our guide through all of this.
Thank you, Lynn and Teresa. This was really a lovely talk. Really enjoyed it. And and thank you everybody who came on live. And I just want to let you know that actually we have 2 webinars in the next month. We have a bonus webinar coming up with Linda Pramsky on August 26th. And the next scheduled 3PGC webinar is on September 11th with Dr. Amy Johnson. So hope to see you all again live and on the recordings. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Thank you.